Hi everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Learning from Experience, Making Leadership Development Intentional, Not Incidental, hosted by HRDQ-U and presented by Mina Wilson and Anand Chandrashaka. Today's webinar will last around 1 hour. If you have any questions, you can always type them into the questions box. We will be answering these questions as they come in live at the end of the presentation or as I follow up by email. My name is Sarah Schaefer, and I will be moderating today's webinar. Dr. Mina Wilson is a Senior Enterprise Associate at the Center for Creative Leadership and author of the Developing Tomorrow's Leaders Today, Insights from Corporate India. A versatile and dedicated professional, during her 22 years at the CCL, Mina has led several significant startups. Anand is a senior research faculty at the Center for Creative Leadership. He combines the rigor of academia with a practical approach to research and then translates the resulting knowledge into solutions that provide sustained impact on individuals, businesses, and the world. Welcome and thank you for joining us today.
Welcome, everybody. Anand, my colleague, is based in Singapore, and I am currently in San Francisco, but usually based in Delhi, India. Next, we are very pleased that you are taking the time out of your busy days to be with us. Next. A brief note about the Center for Creative Leadership, which was founded by H. Smith Richardson, who started the Vicks Vapor Rub product that was concocted in the back rooms in a pharmacy in Greensboro, North Carolina, which is where our headquarters are. The family business went, and fortunes went sky high due to an influenza epidemic. But H. Smith Richardson knew that business cycles go up and down, and he was very convinced from the beginning that he wanted a location where creative leaders could be developed to ride out the ups and downs of business cycles. And so that's how the Center for Creative Leadership, a gleam in his eye, came into existence in 1970. I would like to share with everybody who is listening in that at that time, believe it or not, there was only one book on leadership in the Greensboro Public Library, and look at how many we can find today. Next. So one of our favorite slides really has to do with the boldness that this founder, who is still, his family is still on our board, inspired us with. He said it takes boldness to invest in programs of uncertain possibilities, but it is out of such support that some of the greatest discoveries have been made. And today we will take you through some pioneering research that has led to some profound insights about how people can grow, learn, develop into becoming effective leaders, and how we have packaged that knowledge into the Experience Explorer card deck that we will be sharing with you. Next. So the question really for all of us on the table is, how can we develop more and better leadership talent more quickly? And I'm sure all of you are really ready in your roles and responsibilities to think about this. So let's start by getting an understanding of what you are doing. Next, we will be launching a poll, and this is to get a sense of what approach your organization is most likely to use to develop more and better leadership talent more quickly. So please go ahead. Option A, send managers to leadership development programs. B, mentors and coaches. 3, special assignments. D, a combination, and E, other. Sarah, are we at a point now where we can share the results?
Can you see it, Mina?
No.
Okay. All right. Well, I'll just go ahead and share it for you. It looks like 17% said A, 9% said B, 6% said C, and 63% said D, and 5% said E.
Oh, well, this is good news because what it tells us is that a large percentage are using a combination, and what precisely that combination is something that we're going to dive into in this webinar. Next. So our agenda today is really to convey that among the ways to develop leaders, conveying to all the people who join your organization that learning to learn from their experiences is critical to becoming a top-level leader. And this is how those who join your organization and progress to mid-level can actually develop themselves. We will share with you the powerful research that tells us which are the experiences that need to be pursued and what are the most important lessons to learn. This powerful research has actually then led us to the Experience Explorer card deck, which points out that literally there are 52 experiences. There's a spectrum of 52 experiences and 42 lessons that make the most difference when it comes to developing yourself as an effective leader, and that we do have a structured path for developing oneself and others. And so after that, of course, we will entertain questions and answers. And please keep noting what those questions are for you as we go along. Next. This is it. How can we make leadership development intentional, not incidental? And together with it, how can we make learning from experience intentional, not incidental? Next. We're on to the research. I think that you will enjoy what we share, even though often people feel that research is pretty dry. Next. Where did 70-20-10 really come from? And I think what is most important right now is to get an understanding of how familiar all those who are attending this webinar are with 70-20-10. So Sarah, could you launch your second poll, please? We're inviting you to share with us whether you're not at all familiar, somewhat familiar, familiar, or very familiar with 70-20-10 guideline.
Okay.
Sarah.
Yep.
So
looks like we got a lot of participation. Do you want me to go ahead and read those out for you?
Please, please.
Okay, perfect. Looks like A had 49%, B had 27%, C had 8%, and D had 15%.
Perfect. So this actually gives us a chance then to share about 70-20-10 and dive into it in a little more detail. And so I'm going to stop right at this point and point out that 70% really is about challenging assignments. 20%, the 20 stands for developmental relationships, and the 10 stands for coursework and training. So let's move on. Next. So literally, the book on this, or several books on this, were written through research that started in the 1980s, and this was in-depth interviews with many large numbers of top-level leaders concerning what experiences had helped them to grow and develop as leaders. And it is by analyzing reams of data across 4 studies, primarily in the U.S., that we learned that the best way for leaders to develop themselves and others is through the experiences, 70%, and then the 20 stands for the relationships that they have with bosses, mentors, and others, and the 10 stands for coursework and training. And this may be counterintuitive for most people, because what we tend to do is send people to courses and programs, but that is not where people learn to be leaders. Now, the good news is that we continued with this research, and in 2004, we decided to extend it into the Asia-Pacific region. That is about the time that I moved there. And we extended it by conducting the same kind of qualitative studies with the same methodology into China, India, Singapore, and then we took all of that data and compared it with data that we had in the USA already. Next, what we learned from that, and this is where I think that as professionals we're responsible for the development and growth of other people, you would be happy to know that we were able to drill down into the 70-20-10 and realize that it was 15 types of experiences that constitute the total spectrum of how any individual who wishes to be a top leader can grow themselves or develop others. Next. Now, while 15 seems like, oh my gosh, that's a lot of experiences, we were also able to group those experiences under 70-20-10. And given the listeners that we have today, I will stop for a minute to share that if you look at what's grouped under 70, we have turnarounds, we have an increase in job scope, we have a horizontal move, we have new initiatives, stakeholder engagements, and cultural crossings. And the definition for all of these is available, as are the definitions of all of the rest of the experiences. The 20 is bosses and superiors, difficult people, feedback and coaching. And the 10 is coursework and training. And of course, at this point, you're wondering, what is this hanging out on the right side? Personal experiences, which the previous researchers and the researchers who have continued the work decided we can't really inflict personal experiences, which could be transitions, divorces, career changes, nor can we inflict that second back crisis, ethical dilemmas, mistakes, and career setbacks. Those were grouped as hardships and adverse situations and are not included in the 70-20-10. Next. Now, what I would like to say to everybody is that we have decided that we will send out a white paper that is known, Grooming Top Leadership. And you will find details of what I'm about to share with you next in that paper. The good news is that there may be 15 experiences and there may be groupings of that around 70, 20, and 10, but we were able to identify by our cross-cultural analysis across the US, China, India, and Singapore that there are 5 experiences from which a majority of leadership lessons are learned. And those are bosses and superiors, turnarounds or fix-it situations, increased job scope, horizontal move, and new initiatives. Next. And if you go on a country-by-country basis, we found that in every country there are 2 additional experiences that popped up most frequently. But that doesn't mean that those experiences are not important everywhere. It just means that these 2 additional experiences were more often mentioned in a specific country. We will only use the U.S. and India as examples today. So, for example, in the U.S., many of our interviewees were more likely to talk about what they learned from ethical dilemmas and mistakes. And as an example, in India, our managers were more likely to talk about personal experiences and crossing cultures. And why this is true is a topic that people find fascinating, and we have gone into detail on it in the white paper, Grooming Top Leaders. Next. And what is interesting and surprising is that many of the executive education programs and the coursework that people enroll for today still often has to do with the world of work. It has taken all of the 40 years that the Center for Creative Leadership has been in existence for managers to realize that leadership is about the world of people and the world of self. And that is why we went the extra measure to say we need to classify the 42 lessons into these 3 separate domains of lessons so that it to be a leader realizes that the world of self, thoughts, emotions, actions, mindsets, and attitudes to manage oneself, and the world of people, interpersonal and social skills to connect with people, is every bit as important as picking up all the courses that you want to manage in the world of work about strategy, operations, culture, skills, and perspectives. With all of that, let's move on. Next, Sarah. This is just a heads up about the white paper that we will send you. Next. Could we please now, we think that it is important to stop and pause and invite you to reflect on how we can help managers to get the experiences they need to develop themselves. So this is an open-ended question that we are asking of you. So please let's take a couple minutes and all of the listeners out there begin to roll out those questions. Sarah will read out some of your responses to us.
Okay, looks like we have take advantage of real-life learning opportunities.
Mm-hmm.
Provide coaching, active learning activities, help them better understand the current and future needs of the business, mentoring. Oh, now they're coming in now. Let's help, planning, providing those opportunities, hands-on experience.
Now that's the one. Let's stop on that one because that's where we often find in our work with clients that's where the rubber meets the road, and it's planning for and finding the experiences that can assist people to learn is where a lot of interest is needed. A lot of attention is needed, and we're going to offer you one resource and talk about a few more resources. After all, that's the 70 in the 70-20-10. Next, Sarah. All right. So at this point, I'm going to invite my colleague, Anand, to guide us through the use of the Experience Explorer. Anand.
Thank you, Meena. Good day, everyone. So just as Meena mentioned, the Experience Explorer is a very valuable tool that you can use to provide some intentionality to what experiences provide people and how they can continue to learn from those experiences. So I'm first going to take you through what the Experience Explorer card deck consists of. Next slide. So the Experience Explorer card deck has 5 instruction cards that are white and that kind of give you a quick preview of how you can use these cards. There are 52 experience cards which lay out 52 different experiences that get classified into 15 categories that Meena showed earlier. And what's also included are 42 lesson cards that get classified into the 3 worlds of lessons: the world of work, the world of the self, and the world of people. So let's go on, and what I aim to do here is to provide you all a short preview of how you would use the Experience Explorer card deck in a session when you are interested in getting across the message of developing people, developing experiential-based developing with intentionality. So to do this, we have something called a 4S model. You start by setting objectives, then you sort and select. The third step is to share experiences, and the fourth is the strategize step, which looks to the future in terms of developmental planning. So I'm going to lead you through each of these steps. Next slide. So the first part of the 4S model is to set objectives. So what happens in this step is, as a person in charge of facilitating the session, it is important to clarify for yourself and to your stakeholders what the objective of the session really is. And to do this, what we suggest are 2 different paths. We call one the experience path, and we call the other the lesson path. So choose one of these paths to best suit what you're trying to achieve through the exercise. So the experience path actually works very well when you have a diverse participant group, because then everyone comes along together and shares what their experiences have been. And you'll find that there is tremendous energy in the room when that happens. And it's a great way to start off a session, which would then feed into the lesson path, where they would have an idea, they would have an opportunity to actually sit down and do some planning in terms of what competencies or skills participants want to develop and from which experiences they want to develop it. So the next slide talks about the sort and the select part of the 4S model. Sarah, if you can click one more time to bring up the text. So what I'm showing you here is what would happen face to face. So the picture you see here is of a group of people sorting and selecting the experience cards. So the instructions to them in a face-to-face session would be to sort the cards in 2 stacks. the first stack would have experiences that the person has had, and the second would be a stack of experiences that the person has not had. And then you would go back to the first stack, experiences you have had, and pick 3 cards that really talk to you about experiences that have shaped how you behave as a leader today. Now, we realize that you do not have the cards with you, so we are going to replicate this virtually in a shortened format. So let's move on to the next slide, where you will see on screen that there are 20 experiences listed out. So what I'm going to invite you to do at this point is to think of 2 experiences, select 2 experiences that have shaped how you behave as a leader today, and note down the corresponding numbers. So let's take a few seconds to do this. Just as an example, on my own, I picked E16, that is creating a new service or a new product, and I also picked E02, living and working in another country. So that's my pick. So it's up to you to pick those experiences that have really shaped you as a leader today. So let's just pause for about 10 seconds for you to read through these and to pick those that are very memorable to you. So we're just pausing here so that you get a chance to read through all of those 20 events, 20 experiences, and pick 2 experiences that are very memorable and that have shaped you, how you behave as a leader today. We'll pause for another 10 seconds before we move on to the next slide. Okay, let's move on to the next slide now. This is the slide that you had seen earlier, where Meena had talked about how various experiences fall into these 15 categories. And just to remind you that these 15 categories map on to 70, 20, 10, with the added category of personal experiences and hardships. So let's now move on to the next slide, where you can now correlate the events that you had picked. If you had noted down the numbers of those events, here are the corresponding categories of experiences. So as an example, I had picked E16, created a new service or product or brand, and that falls under new initiatives. My second pick was living and working in another country, E06, which falls under cultural crossing. So those are my 2 picks. So the question to you is, when you look at those 2 experiences that you picked, into which categories do they fall? So feel free to make a note of that for you. So what has basically happened now is that you have sorted through the experience cards and you have selected the most memorable experiences that you have had and those that have shaped you. We now move on to the next slide. And as we move on, I do need to mention that this portion of sorting and selecting the experience cards takes all about 3 minutes, 3 to 5 minutes maximum. But it gives the participants a very vivid opportunity to go down memory lane and think of experiences that they have had and what they have not had. So now we are at a point where we are going to move on to the lesson cards and look at the lessons. So again, this happens in a face-to-face session. So in a face-to-face session, so let's go back. Let's go back to the earlier slide. In a face-to-face session, what you would do is typically invite the to pick one memorable experience and then go through the set of lesson cards and relate what they learned from those experiences to the lesson cards. Now we are going to do a similar thing but in a virtual fashion. So let's move on to the next slide, where you actually see a list of 16 leadership lessons, skills, competencies. So here's what I would invite you to do now. Remember those two experiences that you selected as most memorable? From those two experiences, select one of them which is really memorable to you. And now look at this table that you have on the right side. And from those, select 3 skills that you learned from that one memorable experience. And again, note down the numbers. So just as an example, if you recall in my case, I selected a new initiative, something about creating a new service, a product or a brand. And I'm going to make my selection of what I learned from going through that product development experience. So I learned a lot about communicating effectively, managing bosses and superiors, and I gained a lot of confidence. So my pick in this case is L07, L10, and L16. So those are my picks. Let's pause for a moment so that you can make your picks. So we'll give about 10 seconds, 10 to 15 seconds for all of you to go through it and make your pick. Okay, if you have made your selection, let's move on to the next slide, where you would see how these 16 lessons fall into the 3 worlds that Meena shared earlier: the world of work, the world of people, and the world of self. Now, why is this classification important? You would find that really good leaders have leadership skills that actually they are good at all the 3 worlds. So they are good at managing work while maintaining relationships with people, while at the same time managing their own self. Well, average and poor leaders would probably be really good at 1 or 2 of these worlds, but might not be confident or well skilled enough to work on all the 3 worlds. So again, this section where participants sort through lesson cards takes an average of 3 to 5 minutes, but it surfaces a lot of leadership skills that they learned from memorable experiences. So let's move on to the third of the 4 S model that we saw, and that is about share. Now, in a face-to-face session, this is where you would really find that the energy level of the participants goes up, because what we would invite people to do is to move around the room, circulate around the room, meeting as many people as they could in about 15 minutes, and to share their experiences, to share their memorable experiences and what they actually learned from those experiences. So when people do it in pairs, the listener really listens. We invite the person to listen with a heart and to try to understand what made the particular experience really memorable, for the storyteller. So you can see a visual of people who are really engaged in sharing each of those stories and listening to the other's stories. This is one part of the 4S model that we will not be able to replicate virtually. But what we have for you in the next slide are some reactions that participants in the sessions that we had done had to the share part of the 4S model. So if we would move on to the next slide, you would see how, in one of the companies that we did this workshop with, a person remarked that he thought he was the only person who had taken up an expanded role without getting a promotion. But then it was an eye-opening to that person to understand that almost everyone in the room had been through a similar situation, through a similar experience. And I think this is a good time for you, Meena, to come in and share more about the magic that you see happen in the room when people actually come out and begin to share their stories.
Yes. Thank you, Anand. What I would like to say is that as the developer of this set of cards, we have been using them for the last 2 or 3 years. And what has encouraged me to bring this deck to people in general is that there is a magic that happens. And, you shuffle the cards and then you distribute them and then people select experiences that matter the most and then they have a chance to talk about it. And whether you have a small group of 5 to 10 people or you have just 2 people or you have a room full of 100 people, there is so much energy that is generated from people thinking about things and experiences that have been important to them and what they learned from it, that it's actually hard to get people back. And this is why we feel that this is a prime opportunity for people to learn and listen from experiences other people have had. Back to you, Anand, because I can get carried away with talking about how marvelously this has worked in different parts of the world, corporate, not for corporate, with many different audiences in an astounding way. Thank you, Anand.
Okay, thank you, Meena. So, and the share is also the time when, as facilitators, Meena and I typically introduce the research or the theory behind how and what the symbols on the cards actually mean. So let's move on to the next slide, which is basically the slide on how the experiences get classified into challenging assignments, the 70, developmental relationships, the 20, coursework training, the 10. Are they personal experiences or hardships that a person has faced? So this is the time when we would typically introduce this model to the participants, as well as the model that you see in the next slide, which has to do with the 3 domains of lessons. We showed this earlier to you as a background to how these cards got developed, but in an actual session, when people are sharing the results, that is also the time when, as a facilitator, you would share the findings from research on what it means to learn from experiences and which experiences are most powerful for learning leadership lessons. So until now, you would notice that what we have been doing is to take participants in a session through a journey into the past. In the next slide is where we move on to the strategize part of the 4S model. So if you move on to the next slide, you will see that the strategize portion of the 4S model moves everyone from a focus on past experiences and past leadership lessons to a focus on the future. What are the capabilities that you want to develop in the future? And what experiences do you want to seek in order to develop those desired capabilities? So how would we go about doing it? Let's move on to the next slide where, again, you can experience a portion of this. Now, here is again the listing of the 20 experiences that I showed earlier. What I would invite you to do now is to select one experience that you would benefit most from in the next 6 months. Now, when you're doing a face-to-face session, what we would typically ask the participants to do is to go back to the stack of cards of experiences that they have not had. So we would invite them to seek new experiences and to pick out experiences from those that they have not had so that they can develop the most from that. So let's pause for about 15 seconds here to give you an opportunity to review this list again and to pick that one experiences that you would want to gain in the next 6 months. So now if you have picked the one experience that you've gained, let's move on to the next step. So the next slide invites you to pick 2 skills that you want to develop, that you would like to develop from the experience that you have just identified. So in my case, let's say I picked an experience that said, I want to serve as a mentor to someone. Then I would think about what are the 2 skills that I want to develop as a result of helping someone as a mentor. I might want to develop something about managing, motivating, and developing subordinates. I wanted to learn more about that. I wanted to become better skilled at developing subordinates, and maybe that's why I choose to mentor. So I would choose L08 in this case. So here is where the intentionality actually comes in when you start planning. So the next step of this would be to basically guide participants once they have selected the experience that they would like to have and the lessons that they would like to have, is to think about where they could gain support for what they are doing. So if they wish to act as a mentor, how do you go about doing that? Whom do you want to approach so that you can have a mentoring-mentee relationship set up? And where are you going to seek resources to support you in your learning journey, in the journey of your own development? So this is how you would take the conversation further. So I want to recap whatever we have covered in terms of using Experience Explorer. So the next slide basically summarizes all that we have covered. So in using Experience Explorer, you would start by setting objectives that clarify what the session is all about, both to yourself, to the participants, and to the stakeholders involved. Next, in the sort and the select step, you would guide participants to actually sort through those cards to select experiences that have been most memorable for them, and to think of lessons, leadership skills that they have developed as a result of those experiences. When you move on to the share part is when you generate a lot of energy in the room, where it's not just about my experience and my learning, but about sharing those experiences and how you came about those experiences with others in the room and also learning from others' experiences. The final step is the strategize step, where you move from a focus on past experiences to intentionally planning to get certain experiences and to develop certain skills in a particular time frame, say in the next 6 months to a year. Now, the whole session, Experience Explorer session, takes about 60 minutes to facilitate. And you will find that in those 60 minutes, people get a lot of value in terms of understanding how people learn from experiences, what experiences are important, and developing a plan for themselves, for their own development. So to summarize whatever we have covered, if we move on to the next slide, you will find that this whole thing has been about the idea that powerful experiences matter. Memorable experiences actually impact the way in which leaders lead and manage. And not just experiences. An experience becomes really powerful only when critical lessons, leadership skills are developed by reflecting on those experiences. So when I say lessons, I basically mean shifts in knowledge, shifts in skill level, changes in attitudes, behavior, or even values. So to sum up, the next slide basically sums up all of the discussions that we have been having in terms of saying that with very little effort. Next slide, Sarah. We started off with the question whether we can make learning from experience intentional. And what we have basically done is to present to you a tool called Experience Explorer, which you can use with very little effort. And with very little effort, we can make learning from experience intentional, not just incidental, nor accidental. So what I want to share with you in the next slide are resources which will supplement your usage of Experience Explorer. So there are a couple of books on using experience to develop leadership talent and experience-driven leader development, which has contributions from veterans in the field of learning from experience. And the next set of resources that we want to point you out to are books. The Lessons of Experience book that you see traces the research study that was done way back in the 80s. And other books basically trace the lessons of experience research that was done with specific population, breaking the glass ceiling on what key experiences matters to women's leadership development, high players specifically looking at high potentials in organizations. The most recent book in this, which would interest you if you have an interest in India especially, is Meena's book on developing tomorrow's leaders today, Insights from Corporate India. So having shared all of these resources that are available, I think we have about 10 minutes left. And Sarah, if you can move on to the next slide, we basically want to open up the floor for questions. And what we invite you to do, even as you type in these questions, is go ahead of the Experience Explorer, use it, and please share with us. Meena's email and my email are right out there. Please share with us if you will end up using the Experience Explorer in a different way. If you have any suggestions for its usage and development, we are very open to hearing from you. Experience Explorer has become very powerful through a process of refining it by inputs from various users. So, at this point, we would like to really invite you to become a part of that user community so that we can develop it and use it in a much better fashion.
All right, perfect.
Sarah, over to you.
Yep, all right, thank you. We do have some time for a little bit of questions, so they are coming in now, but while we wait for a little bit more of those questions to filter in, let me just tell you a little bit more about the Experience Explorer. This is a deck of cards that starts conversations, builds camaraderie, and creates networks. Experience Explorer helps managers at all levels realize how much they have learned about leadership from their own powerful experiences. And for a limited time, we are offering a discount of 20% off. And you can learn more about this offer by visiting HRDQstore.com. And also don't forget to register for our weekly webinar Wednesdays at HRDQ-U.com. Okay, why don't we just go ahead and get started with the first question. And this one is coming from Laura. In which situations can EE be used? Is it recommended for individuals or small groups or large groups?
I can take that one. Laura, it can be used in individual situations if you're coaching or mentoring somebody, and it could always be a boss and a subordinate or an HR person. But we have found it also to be very effective in team building, and this is team building across levels. So you can have senior executives who are in the room with emerging leaders, and by sharing experiences, they'll all come onto an even playing field and learn more about each other. I think that when you have extremely large groups, for example, we have had executive education programs such as the University of Chicago use it to onboard as large a group as 300 people. But in that case, it's not as much for planning purposes as much as it is for building camaraderie and ice breaking. Feel free to be in touch with Anand or myself if you would like to discuss this further. Yes, next.
All right, great, thanks. Our next question is coming from Tina. When we use EE, are there any best practices that you recommend?
Anand?
I can take that. There are certain best practices that we do recommend. This is based on Mina's and mine, along with a group of colleagues, usage of Experience Explorer over different audiences. And a lot of these best practices are actually recorded in the facilitator's guide. And you would find that there are best practices given for each of those steps that we have, the sort and select, the strategize, each of those steps. Just to share one best practice is to make sure that you have enough time left to do strategize, because as much as it is exciting to talk about past experiences, what really participants take away from the session is an intentionality about where they want to go next. What is the next experience they want to have, and what are the skills that they really need to develop. It's easy to get carried away in the sort and select and the share steps because, it's highly interactive, it's highly energizing and so on. But it's very important to make sure that there is enough time left for the strategize step.
All right, great. Thank you. And our next question is coming from Matt. Do I need to be certified to use the Experience Explorer?
Mina, do you want to take that?
Yes. Matt, we do not have a certification program for the Experience Explorer. However, one of the ways in which we have prepared people is by having a webinar or a face-to-face session with a group of 5 to 10 or more, up to 50 people and distributing a set of decks. And then just by the process of using it and going through what we have just experienced now, but with actual decks in hand, that actually makes it possible for people to run it. It's very simple to use. One of the comments that we get often about this is that this is an Explorer deck that runs itself.
All right.
Sarah, there are a couple of questions here that I would like to answer.
Okay. Is it the spectrum?
So there's one question from one which basically says, do we need to have a card deck per participant? The answer is yes. You will really need to have one card deck per participant in this because they will have to sort through all of the cards and make sure what experience they have had and what experiences they have not had and so on. So yes. The second question that I would like to answer is from Sue, who basically says, we would like to hear about actual experiences with these deck of cards. Well, Sue, Meena and I have shared some of the experiences that we have had. What we also have is a website called Leading Effectively. If you would go to that website, you would actually find that there are blog posts of the experiences that we have had running these with actually very different groups. So I hope you find that useful.
I would like to take one question from Gary Garcia, who says, is this live or pre-recorded? Gary, we are live. Thank you for asking that question. And there is another one about the time from Sue, which says it appears that it could get time-consuming. Actually, running an initial session, it can be done in 60 minutes. I think that 90 minutes is preferable. It's what happens afterward when people realize that they are able to plan for their future, that they might need offline guidance and counseling, but running an initial session can be done in as little as 60 minutes and at most in 90 minutes. Thank you for asking those questions. Well, back to you, Sarah.
All right, perfect. Those were some great questions. And Meena and Anand, would you just like to add any final thoughts before I just go ahead and wrap up this session today?
Anand, please go.
I just want to give a big shout out. Thank you for being great participants in this. Thank you for asking really important questions that really provided not just you but also others insights into what Experience Explorer is all about and how it can be used. Thank you very much.
Yes, I'm dittoing Anand's comments. For taking an hour of your valuable time to listen and sit through the webinar, and inviting you to feel free to be in touch with one of us. It may take us a little time to get back to you, but we will surely do so because we want to share the powerful results that we believe that this Experience Explorer deck can develop. Thank you.
All right, great. Thank you again so much. And unfortunately, that is all the time we have for today. If we did not get time to answer your question, you will receive an email response with those answered questions probably about mid-next week. So we appreciate your time, and we hope you found today's webinar informative. Thanks.